Let's dive right in, and we're going to start with Andrew. Andrew chimes in on a topic that a lot of people, and it's really the only thing happening in college football. So here we go. He chimes in. Hi, Joel. Love the show. In your opening, you say that this is the dawn of the golden age of college football, and you frequently refer to the problems in the sport as, quote, champagne problems, end quote. I can't remember if I have heard you talk about this, but other big-name commentators report that there are coaches out there who are ready to hang it up, all because things are getting out of control and the chaos is among us. I added that part. If there are coaches out there paid as much as they may be who don't know if they can continue on with college football at this pace, how can these just be, quote, champagne problems? Looking forward to the next show. Andrew, that's an excellent email. There's no doubt. And let me start by saying, I believe that I am right, that this is the dawn of the golden age of college football. And I also believe that there are massive problems that we need to get right and have to get right in order for that to happen. Okay? Notice how I never said that we are in the golden age of college football, because I do think that this is the dawn, this is the beginning, but there are things that we've got to correct in order to get there. And the evidence of that is what's going on currently here in the offseason between Tennessee and the NCAA. So let's dive into that. And I thought that talking about that specifically, this back and forth between the NCAA and Tennessee really encapsulates what we're talking about, Andrew, in terms of the sport overall, because it's really about the chaotic nature and finding a way to form guardrails and structure in this chaotic environment so that the sport can flourish, and more so that the individuals, the human beings within the sport can flourish, whether they're coaches, administrators, or players themselves. Okay, so here we go. Let's jump into it. Tennessee and the NCAA. This is getting messy, by the way. I'm sure you've seen it out there. I'm not going to run down the details because you come to here for the thoughts of it. Okay, so Tennessee is now in a lawsuit with the NCAA. We've seen Jeff Hafley, the head coach at Boston College, leave college football. He's now the defensive coordinator for Green Bay. We've seen Nick Saban retire. And maybe he would have retired anyways, but there's no doubt that the chaos in college football, I think, sped things up for Nick Saban. We've seen Jim Harbaugh walk back to the NFL. We've seen guys like the coordinators at Michigan. Both Mike McDonald wanted to get back to the NFL. Jesse Minter then wanted to get back to the NFL. By the way, congratulations to Mike McDonald on becoming the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Nick Holtz, a guy that's now a coordinator in the National Football League that has his roots more in college football. He was a teammate of mine at Colorado. Now he's going to be a coordinator in the league, and he's the type of guy that I envision being a college football coach, but he's in the NFL. Why? Because you can be a football coach in the NFL. So all of that is speaking to what Andrew was speaking of. And it stems from what's going on at the heart of this Tennessee NCAA issue, this lawsuit, this back and forth. Okay. Rather than banter on and on about the details of all of those lawsuits, let's just take a little bit of a 30,000-foot view here and look at this issue. First things first, we are in this moment because the NCAA failed. I think we all kind of understand that, but just so that you know, if you go back to 2014, 15, and 16, there were subcommittees that were basically charged with forming ideas that could be the framework structures around name, image, and likeness. Because at the time, the NCAA was going through all of these lawsuits, O'Bannon lawsuit, and so on and so forth, and they knew that this was coming. And so they're like, okay, maybe we can get ahead of this. Now, at the time, people within those groups, those working groups for the NCAA, and I had conversations. I had conversations with these people. I told them at the time that, listen, you can take 3 steps that you don't want to take right now in 2017 and 18, or you're going to be forced via court rulings to take 10 steps that you're unprepared to take in 2020 or 2021. That's exactly what happened. So these working groups actually took frameworks and guidelines and proposals back to the NCAA in 2016, 17, and 18. And guess what the NCAA did with them? Nothing. They did nothing. Their failure to act at that moment is why we are at this moment. where there is chaos because they were forced to take 10, 11, 12 steps that everybody is unprepared to take. That's why there's no structure. That's why there's no guidelines. So the NCAA is at fault ultimately for the spot that we're in college football. And I think all of us kind of understand that, right? They're the boogeyman. They're the one that everyone can blame. And I do it on this show, and everyone does it. And they're an easy punching bag, right? They're a very easy punching bag. It should be noted that there are still rules in place around boosters, inducements, and tampering. Okay, those rules go back decades and decades within the NCAA. Okay, so that's important because now you get to this moment where Tennessee and others are being investigated for violations in regards to and in relation to the NIL and their NIL practices. Tennessee is, I think, rightly wondering why they're being singled out. And I think it's really important to state off the bat, both entities here are right. How can that be true? Well, let's lay it out here quickly. Tennessee is asking, why are we being singled out? Because they're not doing anything that everyone else isn't doing. Now, is that really an excuse? No, it's not. You can't just say, everybody's doing it. Guess why? They'll say, get in the car, Frank, right? And no, KFC is not open, if you know what I'm talking about. So it's not an excuse, and yet they're right. Because of the ambiguity and the lack of structure and guidelines surrounding NIL, they're trying to work in an environment where there is no structure, and yet the NCAA is trying to hang on these rules that were in place before NIL surrounding boosters, inducements, and tampering. So it's a mess. Is the NCAA technically right? Yeah, they're trying to hold on to some of these rules that predate NIL, and yet they allowed NIL to enter this chaotic period in which everybody is just Katie bar the door. So you've got to understand that the NCAA is correct that there are rules, and yet why are they singling out Tennessee? Why are they singling out Florida State, Florida, for that matter? Because I can tell you, and I'll explain exactly what's going on and how. If they were actually enforcing rules surrounding tampering, inducements, and boosters, and the involvement in boosters within inducements and recruitment, every single program in the country would be investigated. And every single program in the country would be given a notice of allegations. Let me just give you an analogy here. You're driving on the highway, okay? You haven't seen a speed limit sign in miles. Guess what you're going to do? You're going to drive the exact same speed or similar speed as everybody else around you. That's what you're going to do. That's what you're going to do. If you get pulled over and you're the only one that gets pulled over, the first thing that you'll ask is like, what's the problem, officer? And if that officer says, well, you were speeding, you're going to be like, I'm sorry, what? Where? And by how much? What's the speed limit? And he'll be like, it's 55. Where was it posted that it was 55? 13 miles back. And you're like, what? Why did you pull me over? And you would be rightly incensed about your bad luck that you're the only one pulled over on the side of the road while every other car is going 70 to 92 miles an hour. That's essentially what's going on. Okay, so all the cars that are going 70 miles an hour on the highway are complaining about the cars going 92 miles an hour on the highway. And they're like, man, those people are crazy. Look at them breaking the law. Can you believe how brash they are with their boosters and their inducements and the tampering? I wish the NCAA would get them. They're going 92 miles an hour. Meanwhile, you're going 70 and it's a 55 and nobody knows it. That's what's going on right now. So is Tennessee correct in being completely irate that they're the ones being investigated for what everyone else is doing? Yes. Why? Because in their minds, they feel like the NCAA pulled all the speed limit signs. You pulled all the speed limit signs. You didn't post it anywhere. We don't know what to do. And now you're pulling us over and you're trying to give us a ticket? Absolutely not. And so they're rightly fighting back. And yet the NCAA is sitting there and they're like, hold on. These rules have been in for a long time. 13 miles ago, there was a big old sign. So you see the problem here is that we're in this position because of a failure that happened in the past. And now the NCAA is trying to hang on to their power for whatever reason. Obviously, they feel like that's their only way to hang around. And so they're going to try to go after and they're the ones that are going to clean up NIL. Well, newsflash, that ain't happening. The NCAA is not going to be the ones to clean up NIL. They're not going to be the ones to clean up the transfer portal. They're not going to be the ones to clean up inducements and tampering. Why? Because they're the ones that put us in this position in the first place. Okay? So I don't think programs and coaches and anybody within the sport is going to take them seriously. And the reaction of Tennessee to this notice of investigation from the NCAA is exactly what you're going to get from everybody around the country. So that's what we're going on. That's what's going on right now. And this is how it happens. Okay, so coaches are complaining about how this works. And yet the coaches then participate in how it works. And this is where I get frustrated with coaches. They'll explain these scenarios to me like, well, we've got this kid and he was committed to us and, he asked us for, I'm going to throw out, I've had this conversation, but I'm going to change the details. This kid, he asked us for $350,000 up front and within his NIL package. And he verbally committed, but now he's waffling on whether he's going to sign or not. And I'm like, wait. So you paid him the $300,000 or $350,000 up front, and yet there's no way that you could go back after that if he doesn't sign his letter of intent with you? And they're like, yeah, so we're just kind of sweating it. And then they're the same ones that are like, man, we got to do something about this. I'm sorry, you're participating in it. Okay? Man, this kid, we paid him the $300,000, but that school wants to give him a Lambo and $500,000. So now we got to come up with another $200,000. I'm like, this is madness. So the thing that you hate, the thing that you despise, you're participating in, which perpetuates it. Now, to some extent, I get it, because how else do you acquire the talent necessary to win, which is the bottom line? So I understand why they're participating in it, but they are participating in it and they're perpetuating it, which then guess what? Nothing's going to change. So that's what's going on. That's what it looks like. Advancements, it's housing payments, it's jobs for relatives, it's cars, all of it's inducements, which is technically against the rules that were posted 13 miles ago. To continue the analogy, the current state, what I'm explaining, is totally unsustainable. It's totally unsustainable. And the reason is because we won't be honest with what it is. We won't clearly define it. I think I am a big believer in that you got to speak truth, right? You just have to. You've got to say what it is, or else it's never going to be fixed. Just isn't. I believe in that philosophy as a father. I believe in that philosophy as a husband. I believe in that philosophy as an analyst. Okay? I don't think I would serve you listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, if I was dancing around subjects. You get my unfiltered opinion. Why? That's the only way I know how to do business. And yet in college athletics, generally speaking, and much more so in football, college football, we aren't truthful with what's going on. We are fully immersed right now, currently, in pay for play and employee status, essentially. Fully immersed. That's what it is. It is pay for play. We are in the employment era. We are in the pay for play era. And yet no one wants to touch those terms. Nobody wants to touch those terms. Everyone's like, well, I don't know if we can do the whole employee-employer relationship. But that's what it is already. You gave the kid $300,000 in an advancement. you see the craziness, right? You see the craziness. And when you don't explain what it is, you get an imbalance in the relationship because one entity can take advantage of the other entity or person in this relationship, okay? And I know that's a grand analogy, right? That's a large analogy. But when you're not honest with what's going on and what the relationship actually is, when it's not defined properly and the ambiguity exists, then one can take advantage of the other. And this is where I found it so interesting to sit down with and talk with Nick Saban last spring, almost a year ago, in Big Noon Conversations. And I asked him specifically about this kind of topic and more specifically, the player's role within it. His answer was phenomenal. Here it is.
If you were to start to address some of the issues in college football, where would you start?
Well, I think you have to create a balance between how much do you take and how much do you give.
Okay.
We're giving people scholarships. We're creating name, image, and likeness opportunities. But what is their commitment? I mean, there's no place in the world where you don't have a contract. If you're going to receive benefits, you have a contract and an obligation to do a certain job. So when you can opt out, transfer, do whatever you want, whenever you want, I'm not sure the balance is quite right.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a lot of people out there that are much more qualified than me that are trying to figure out how do we fix this. But I think we do need to create some balance because I think at the end of the day, when you create an atmosphere where somebody's tentatively committed to what they're trying to accomplish, you have to evaluate, is that really a good thing?
Sure.
Because we all need to be totally committed to whatever, our goals and aspirations are, the sense of purpose that we have, if we're going to have a chance to be successful.
Well, that's exactly right. And now we all know that he was speaking more about like the player side of that relationship. I was telling you like there's going to be one side that takes advantage of the other. Well, in this case, the player can take advantage of the relationship. And the reason is because we're not defining it properly. Now, he might be talking about like, oh, I wish players would be more committed and they're tentatively committed, but they're allowed to be tentatively committed because we won't call it what it is, which is pay for play. We are in the era. It is happening all over the country. Every single school is paying players. They can call it a stipend. They can call it whatever they want. Every school is paying players directly to be football players at their school. Can we please define it as it is? That's the first step. Until we do that, I don't think that we can fix it. All right. But once you do that, now you can start to build some guardrails, right? You can start to build contracts. All of us understand this innately. I certainly understand this. I'm a freelancer, technically. Technically speaking, Fox hires me as a freelancer, okay? So I am not a staff Fox employee. I don't get benefits, right? They don't take taxes out of my paycheck. I have to do that because I'm technically self-employed. They hire me as a freelancer. Now, within that, much like an athlete, I agreed to a contract for a term. And within that term, I do not have freedom. So I gave something up to get what they were offering. They pay me a sum of money for me to give them my services. All right, so we have a contract, and that contract cannot be broken. It's binding. It's binding. Well, I'm sorry, that sounds a lot like what we need in college football. But no one wants to like, oh man, we can't have that because then it's employee-employer relationship. What do you think is going on? What do you think is going on? Until we define it, we will never be able to fix it. Now, at this point, I think that we're getting close to that. I do. Because what needs to happen is that we clearly define what we're doing, and then we need to start working our way and distancing ourselves away from the NCAA. Now, you might have heard, and it got a little bit of mention, that the SEC and the Big Ten have formed kind of a working group, and they're starting conversations about what it looks like to kind of, they didn't specifically say what it looks like to break away from the NCAA, but that's essentially what they're talking about. Like, hey, how do we fix this? Well, when they say, like, how do we fix this? That means without you, NCAA. All right, because you've put us in this position. Now you're going to arbitrarily start pulling people over on the highway, and this is unsustainable. So part of this and their working group is going to be, let's clearly define it. Let's put up guardrails so that we can enter into official employee-employer relationships. Now, what does that look like exactly? I'm not totally sure. And the one key leverage point that the NCAA is going to have in all of these discussions, right, and in all of this, is the basketball tournament, which has nothing to do with football. Football does not need the NCAA at all, not one iota. They could break away tomorrow and no one would know the difference. The NCAA is actually a net hindrance over college football than a net giver to college football. But the one thing that the NCAA does give is the basketball tournament. And the leverage point isn't even necessarily the revenue generated from the basketball tournament, although it's immense, because it still pales in comparison to the revenue you can generate from college football. It's actually the PR nightmare that would exist if these conferences and schools ended up blowing up the relationship and doing away with the NCAA basketball tournament. American sports fans would revolt. And American sports fans en masse would revolt against those that killed their beloved March Madness. That's part of this. That's part of this. Again, 30,000-foot view. That's what's going on right now. So they're forming working groups and they're talking about, like, okay, how do we do this? Maybe it is outsourcing the NCAA to run the basketball tournament. Maybe it's trying to form a basketball tournament outside of the NCAA that can be as good or better. I don't know what it looks like, okay? I'm not an expert in that space, but they are going to be talking about things in ways to start to put up guidelines and barriers and structures that take away power from the NCAA and give governance back to these conferences and maybe even a centralized governing body for college football. That would be a good thing. That would be a very good thing. Now, what does all of this result in? All of this chaos results in where we kind of started this question, which was the coaches. And this is exactly what Andrew brought up in the question, which was, it seems like these coaches, and I would second what the other commentators that you've heard have said, and I've had these conversations with guys out there, that it's totally unsustainable, and some will jump at the first chance they get to leave college football. We've already seen that, and I've explained some of those guys. We've also seen guys having to make a very difficult choice to basically dive headfirst into not coaching, but becoming a CEO. That would be Ryan Day. So Ryan Day essentially says, okay, listen, I can't be the coordinator. I can't call plays. I'm going to have to go and really take the reins of NIL to raise the money and fundraise in order to accumulate talent so that we can have a roster that can potentially go and beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and win the national championship. So in order to do the things on the football field that they desire, their head coach has to remove himself from the football field and dive into the business side of the sport. Those are the decisions they're going to have to make. If you're a head coach, you've either got to dive into the business or you've got to dive into the NFL. Well, I don't like either of those decisions for these guys because it's not why they went into these careers in the first place. They went into these careers to coach football, to impact young men in a positive way, right? And for me, I want to see them do that because that's what they're experts in. That's what they're experts in. If you're looking at this, there is a role that the program has to fill in changing the structure of how college football is built. It's not all just lamenting what the NCAA has caused. And it's not all just lamenting the fact that the calendar is broken and that it's unsustainable for coaches and that they might have to leave. There is a way that the programs can actively, in the midst of the chaos, insulate their coaches and become even better and move forward as programs, both football and overall as their athletic departments. Let me explain that for a moment. Even in the NFL, and we've talked about this on this show, even in the NFL, head coaches do not have general manager duties. All right. We have stripped head coaches of other duties above themselves throughout the years in the NFL because it's just bigger than one guy. One guy can't do it. He can't be the ultimate evaluator and the coach and the game planner and all of that. He can't. He can't be the cap expert and so on and so forth. So because it's run like a business and they define themselves properly, they can build a hierarchy that is proper. In college football, an athletic director, many of whom don't have much football background at all, hire a coach for the purpose of the press conference and fundraising. They want to get the excitement of their fan base up and increase it. So they hire a football coach. Then that football coach becomes a mini little dictator, and he hires every other person. So the org chart starts with like non-football guy, football guy, everybody else. And by the way, that head coach is charged also with the game plan and everything, evaluating the players, recruiting the players, handling NIL, handling fundraising, doing all of it. Well, that's crazy. That's crazy. I believe that programs need to start building themselves to insulate that position. I believe athletic directors should hire general managers, a president of football operations. The president of football operations should be hiring the head coach. He should be hiring the general manager, the cap expert, in this case, the NIL expert. Those people have a job regardless of the head coach. You see, the head coach can't just hire everybody because then they all answer to him. But that's not the position that we really want those coaches to have. We want them to be football coaches. So you insulate them from the other areas with an org chart. That org chart exists in the National Football League. This is why the coaches are running to the National Football League. So build it in college football. Keep them there. Keep them there. And this is where the coaches' give and take has to come in. Nick Saban talked about it from a player's perspective. I talked about it from a player's perspective. You define the relationship properly so that one entity can not take advantage of the other entity. Well, the same thing can, in a way, be spoken for the coach. The coach needs a little bit of give and take. Guess what? You can't have all the power in college football. If you're going to lament the calendar, if you're going to lament your schedule, and if you're going to complain about the setting that you're in, then guess what? Guess what? You need to dilute your power. You cannot have all the power in your program. Now, you might make as much money. I'm not saying that you're going to have to take a pay cut. Maybe you will. I'm not sure. But you can't have ultimate say over everything. If you want to be a football coach, then be a football coach. But that means that you're going to have a GM. It means you're going to have a director of football operations or a president of football operations. There will be a front office within college football. The fact that we don't have that right now in the midst of $1 billion industry is crazy. It's crazy. We've allowed ourselves to get to this point, and the fixes are right in front of us. And all we have to do is be honest with where we're at, have a little bit of a give and take, just as Nick Saban pointed out. And I think that we can get into a position where coaches are insulated, the calendar is fixed, the relationship is properly yoked between the player and the institution. There are contracts, there are models, and then we can move forward. And then we will be in the golden age of college football. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.